I mean, look, unfortunately, there is no one who can walk around, even Jim, who can walk around untouched by the culpability of what our government does, and frankly, what many governments do. That's just the reality.
I don't know if Jim is still listening, but I'll tell you this. I knew a family who were war tax resistors, and they owned a home. They had income, they had property, and they publicly stated they would send they would pay their state and local taxes. Then they would send to the IRS essentially a notary saying not paying taxes for the following reasons. And this was in the 80s, I think. And they would redirect their money to groups in Nicaragua who were survivors of the human rights abuses of the Contras, who we were funding at the time. If you do that, you're in the clear. Okay? And actually, incidentally,
Did
I
they
think
end up
these
going to
people
prison?
they lost their home. They
Oh.
didn't go to prison. They lost their home. These people also voted for Democratic presidential candidates, as far as I recall.
Well, I mean, look,
but I'm just saying.
The reality of this is that there is no, this is not a binary situation. This is going to be very difficult for people like Jim to absorb, but there is no binary situation. Now, I think it's perfectly legitimate to argue or to attempt to argue, and I never heard a successful argument as to how voting for what you perceive to be the more of two evils brings you out a better result. But the only way that Jim's calculation works is that somehow you can convince yourself of your moral righteousness. That's it. If there was a strong argument, and I had just about every major proponent of an argument as to why you should vote against Obama on this program. Maybe there were others out there that I just wasn't aware of, but I mean, ones that were that I was aware of. I invited every one of them on the program, and we had an extended conversation about it. And anybody who listens to what I tell them and they go against their own judgment as to how they're going to vote is more problematic than the way that they voted, frankly. But certainly all those arguments were aired. And if there was an argument that voting for Gary Johnson would have brought about any type of meaningful change, and I certainly was open to it. I mean, in my case, I would have been more interested in a Rocky Anderson or maybe a Jill Stein. But nevertheless, I never heard that argument. So, but Jim's still feeling, wonderfully morally righteous, and good for him.
I get frustrated with all these things getting conflated. Like, the reality is that sure, there's going to be residual forces, sure, whatever, but Obama is drawing out of Iraq. Mitt Romney said taking troops out of Iraq was a tragedy. That's a direct quote. So, even within these specifics, there are significant differences.
Chuck Hagel's disposition towards our military interventions is going to create less death than Mitt Romney's choice?
Chuck Hagel said invading Iran is a fairy tale. No one who's nominated in a Mitt Romney cabinet is going to say anything like that.
And maybe that's meaningless distinction. Maybe that's a meaningless distinction.
No, I don't think it is.
Well, I don't think it is either. No. But according to Jim, it is. And so had I voted for, look, we don't know who I voted for, but nevertheless, had I advocated for Gary Johnson, I could sit here and I'd be floating 6 inches off my chair right now. And nothing would have changed. Nothing would have changed. And had Mitt Romney been brought into office, we would be looking at some neocon who is going to be agitating for war with Iran.